Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership with Heart LinkedIn Live, or just live stream for today, September 16th. So today I'm super excited. I haven't been on in a little bit, but one of the things that was brewing in the background was this concept of how do we impact the current environment when it comes to the race relations in America and around the world? How can we best impact it? And one of my ideas was, I think the major impact is that do what we can control. If we are parents, we can control how it is that we parent, how we show up as parents, and how we teach our children so that they can be more open-minded citizens. So to that extent, I put together a group. It's really exciting, of people who I thought could add a lot of depth to the conversation. So I'm going to add them right now on to the live stream. Okay, so now we have Dr. Robinson. You might hear me talk to her or refer to her as Renata. She's a friend, so I call her that a lot. But she, just so you know, if you want to do it in the comments, you can use Dr. Robinson or Renata. But I have her on here, and she will be here to talk about kind of the impact or focus on relationships when we're talking about this issue. And then we have Cordelia Gaffar, and she's going to help us be thinking about us as parents and focusing on replenishment. And we'll be talking about some other things in addition to that. And then we have Devon, Bandison, and he's going to be on here. I'm so excited to have him. He'll be also talking about it. But as you see, there's 3 women and 1 man. And we are all people of color. And so we want to have this conversation and provide insights from our perspective to those who may look like us or those who might not look like us. So welcome, everybody. This is exciting. We finally got on here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Great to see you, Heather, and everyone else.
And we're on like different time zones and everything. So I'm in Colorado, so is Renata, and then you got Devon's in New York, right?
New York, that's right. New York.
I got that in my blood, so that's why I can do that. Yeah. And then Cordelia, you're in, where are you at again?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. So we are spread about and ready to have a great conversation. And welcome, Keith, to the conversation as well. We have people that will be joining in on the comments, and I'll, when they're asking questions or making comments, I will add it to the screen so that my guests can actually come on and also see those questions or responses or whatever, and then they can also talk about it as well. So today the title is Co-Creating Better Race Relations Through Conscious Parenting. So the idea for us is to relate our experience as parents, where we've done great things and maybe where we've fallen short in this area of in this topic, in race relations, cultural relations, just things that are happening, even COVID, anything that's happening right now in the world. How are we talking to our children about it? So okay, so I'm going to start off with this like round robin of a little bit more about me. I have 4 children. Most of you know that if you watch on the live stream. 4 children, 3 of them young men, and 1 is the oldest is my daughter. And so, yeah, I'm faced with all the things that are happening right now. So I have 4, and my oldest is 17. My youngest is 10. So now let's go to the next person. Renata?
I have 2, and I call them little people, but one just turned 18 and 1 is 15 today. So I have teenagers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships. And I can tell you it's interesting times and lots of conversations around the table with what's happening in the world today. And I'll share just some perspective that I have.
Awesome. Who's next? Devon?
I was going to say, go ahead, Cordelia. I'll go. Yeah, I'm a father.
A man in the middle.
A man in the middle. I'm a father of 3 wonderful children who, if I looked at my greatest teachers in my world, no joke, they've taught me more than I've ever learned from anyone else. My daughter is 22 years old. I have a son who's 18, and then my little guy who's 10, who I'll be coaching his basketball game in about 3 hours. So we got a lot going on out here in New York.
New York.
And I have 6 children. I have 4 daughters and 2 sons. My oldest daughter is 20. She's in the Navy. And my youngest child is also a girl, and she's 6.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, you got some youngins over there.
Yeah. I have a 10-year-old too, so like I know that the boys aren't much different than the girls at 10. It's interesting times, right, Devon?
Absolutely.
One of the things that I talked about kind of in the preface was this idea of how we feel, what we can control, what we can influence are, as parents, are the things that we tell our children, the things that we fail to tell them, the things that we show them in our behaviors. And so we came up with this concept of around conscious parenting, though, but it was the idea of replenish and relationships and respect. And those are kind of the three areas we wanted to be focusing on as we talk about us as parents and how we show up, how we communicate with our children on the topics that are facing us in this world. And then, of course, the idea of the relationships and respect around that. So I don't know, let's go around and let's talk about that. Cordelia, let's start with the replenishment side. Where are we should be focusing on right now as it relates to that and our children and how we are as parents?
Yeah, I was really struck because when this all came about with George Floyd's killing back in May, and into June, my 15-year-old, she was just like, Mom, we have to go and protest and we have to do these things. And so I encouraged, first of all, I had to slow myself down, and I encouraged her to also just, okay, so why is it that you want to protest? What is it? What's the outcome that you're seeking? What are the, where are you going to protest and why? Is it a policy change, or are you just angry? And so just, really acknowledging your own emotions so that you can be more of a sounding board for your children, because they have lots of emotions around what's going on. They have strong opinions, and they want to take action, right? But helping them to slow down, to see what is the appropriate action, and understanding why you're making that decision and why you want to move in that way. And I always encourage, for myself, to just always come from a place of what is it that I want to create, and always, I'm not sure if you saw my post earlier, love anyway, right? Because everyone's projecting from some place. And just make sure that it's a heart-centered place, or a place that is going to create something that is positive, rather than, we're not responsible really for how things are going to land with other people, but we can control our own energy. We can be responsible for our energy and what we bring to it. Yeah. We don't have to do all the things, is really what I'm saying. Just, one thing at a time.
I think when I hear that, I hear so much emotional intelligence there, when I think about emotional self-awareness, but I think of that whole idea of self-control, self-management, managing our own emotions in the moment, as we see it on the news, as we hear it from a friend, as we hear it on the radio. Are we doing what you're talking about, which is that slowing down, that kind of taking those breaths to kind of pause, recognize that we might feel anxiety, we may feel fear, all those things that they're feeling, but do we want to give them that baggage? Because let's be clear, we already give them baggage. I mean, as parents, our parents gave us baggage. We almost have to choose which baggage we're giving them. And so if we can manage to take those times, and I'm going to be honest here, this is not my strength, which is why they didn't give me replenishment. I'm just gonna be 100% clear. I wish I could say I was super strong as me. That's probably, even as a leader, it's one of my shortcomings, is to make sure that I pause more before I open my mouth. So this is just as critical. So Devon, what about you on this topic of replenishment?
Yeah, and I appreciate the conversation is rich already. And you said a few things, both Heather and Cordelia. The slowing down part, right? When you talk about conscious parenting, for me, I'm thinking about the conversations I'm having with my son at 10 years old are actually way more advanced than my other two children as they were growing up. Now, we've had similar conversations, but because of the times we're in, I think that our children are exposed to things way earlier than they normally are. And the other thing that you talked about, so for me, consciousness is are we on autopilot, or are we truly present with our children? Are we truly present with the times? Or are we on autopilot kind of parenting as if we're just recreating with our parents or what we've seen other parents do, rather than truly, parenting in a way where I parent, the way I parent my 10-year-old is not the same way I parent my 18-year-old.
Mhm.
And one thing I like to talk about in regards to, I'm work with a lot of fathers, but parenting in general, I usually say fatherhood is leadership and parenting is leadership, not in the title aspect, but in the word you said earlier, influence. Your influence, because children, watch what we say, but also watch what we do. So one of my questions always is, when you're being a conscious parent, is your audio matching your video, right? Is what you're saying matching up to what you're doing? And I'm not saying being perfect, because some of the greatest ways to parent consciously is not to show children that you're acting like you're perfect. But for me, my greatest teaching of my children has been in my imperfections. I fall short and I don't try to cover it up. And we have discussions around that. And for me, that is allows for that emotional intelligence and that IQ that you're talking about, where children don't have to walk around, especially Black and brown children, have to walk around feeling like they have to reach this level of perfection and never can fall short and have this pressure on them at an early age. So for me, conscious parenting is allowing them to see our imperfections, to have honest conversations, to allow our children to hear us say, that's a good question. I don't have that answer. I'm going to get back to you. I think that for me, empowering in that way is very important. And one other thing, as Cordelia was saying, for me, replenish is about, like, I can't give what I don't have. Right. So for me, replenish, and we talk about my accent in New York. The other word I like to use is a saucer, right? The thing
the saucer
is a saucer, SAWCAA. and how I look at replenish as a parent, as women and men of color who serve outside of parenting, serve the community. Oftentimes we're pouring from our cup, and eventually what happens is our cup gets empty. And when our cup gets empty, we're less patient, we're overwhelmed, and we're not as present. And so for me, when I'm working with parents and we have these discussions, it's important for me to find what fills your cup up. What are the things that fills your cup so you have an overflow on the saucer? So some of those things for me is being around my son and coaching his team, or practicing meditation, or taking time to walk, or challenging my limiting beliefs. And when I fill my cup for that, so there's an overflow, now when I'm serving my family, when I'm serving the community, my cup never gets empty, because it's always being served from the saucer. So I think that as parents, it's important to replenish and put you first. It's not selfish. It's actually the most selfless thing you can do, because the better you take care of yourself, the better you'll be able to take care of others.
It's one of the things that, as you're saying that, I just think of, again, self-control again. I think if you're doing what you're talking about, and I used your example, I gave you credit though, but I used your example of the salsa and the mug the other day.
Yeah.
And I think that is so, so true. I find, like, for myself, that I am less patient. I'm going to say things I shouldn't be saying. And so that, like, the teaching that I should be offering to my kids in a time that's very tense is not going to come out as rational. It's not going to come out as centered if I hadn't filled myself up. Yeah. Right. And so I think that's really, it's key. I'm taking time for me, and you might feel guilty, but it's like, mom's going to take time. Dad's going to take time. Yeah. And believe me, I'm going to be better for you when I come back. And now I can say things to you. I can handle the world and all the craziness around it. I can handle it in a different way with you because I've taken that time. So
100%.
I love it.
Yeah,
absolutely. I would just echo and agree. We have this conversation. I'm with Heather. That was not my expertise as a mother for many years. I never took time for myself, but I was also watching my mother and what she did, and she didn't do that. And she was a great mom. However, she did what she knew to do. And what I learned to do that was probably about maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I tell you, that replenishing and setting boundaries really creates space for you to be able to give real reasons and real encouragement and really be present. And I would say being present in ways that Devon's talked about, but being present and actually hearing your children, because when you're tired and you're exhausted and they're trying to come to you and talk, you don't hear them if you haven't taken time for you. So it does really make sense. So I agree. Yeah.
Oh, it made me think of, Devon, when earlier you said, like our children, particularly African-American children, people of color, just feeling like a pressure, and the children right now feeling a pressure to be perfect, and that, when they're at school or whatever, they have to, and part of that is that for me, I'm going to be honest, has been my teaching over the years. And I've gotten more cognizant of being realizing that's my baggage. And so that I've given him that. And so I realize now when he said the other day, yeah, there's just, I feel like I need to get a release, which was really intelligent of him. I need a release because I feel like I am having to always like have a higher bar, higher level at school. And then when I come home, I'm kind of expected to act a certain way, all these different things. And so I really need to have a better release. And so that's a really intelligent concept for a 13-year-old. And so what are the things that you could do? And so we talked about, walking the dog. And for him, he's like, well, he started to think about it. He's like, I like the idea of being able to maybe read something that I don't have to read, but before bed, reading something I don't have to read. Yeah, I haven't done it in a while because I've been so, and so those are those conversations when you're having those open conversations, helping him to think through how he can get a healthy release, right? Because there's lots of ways that are not healthy. And so thinking about the healthy release that he can have. And so that just made me think of that. And again, he felt comfortable enough to have that conversation with me because I'm an open parent that I have those kind of conversations. And I said, listen, you don't have to be perfect. Now, unfortunately, yes, we are held at a different standard, but you don't have to worry about from mom or dad that you're going to get yelled at because like one thing happened that like rarely happens. It's just going to have, you're going to have fun with friends and you need to be able to have fun. You need to be able to have a kid, be able to be a kid. Yeah. So just be okay with that. And that was kind of the conversation we had, really just open. Not all households are open that way, where the parents, mom, dads, they don't all talk about things in a very open way that way. And I think that's probably where Renata's going to probably go next too, is having that openness.
Yes, for sure. So piggybacking off of openness, that is something that I think is so important in your relationship with your children. When Devon was talking about being present in what's happening today too, with your kids. So when I think of relationship, I like to try and give words or wisdom to hold on to when you walk away. I like to pull that word apart, relationship, right? So relate, like, how do you relate with your children? And if you like threw the letters all around, that's about being real and really relating to your kids and listening to your kids and actually empathizing and understanding where they are. Because to Devon's point, I see a difference between my 18-year-old and my 15-year-old, and the ability to communicate and talk about what's happening in society. I would have never talked about as a kid. I was too busy climbing trees, trying to shoot water guns and all that kind of stuff. Where my kids are like sitting down at the table and having real conversations about the impact. My son said to me, Mom, why do the police officers not like me? And I had to really pause in that moment and really like empathize with him and then also be real with him. The reality is it's not that all police officers don't like you. There are human beings that choose negative behaviors, and there's human beings that sign up to be a police officer in society and are doing the right thing. And actually unpacking that situation and still being conscious of my parenting with him. So one thing that I shared with him, and I love to give examples and stories because I think you can relate to those. He's in school now online, which is completely different. Not something he's done before. He's 15. He's very active. He's in football, basketball. He loves sports. So having him sit down at a computer all day is a challenge in itself. So having real conversations around that, and also not having this false expectation that he's going to do a grand job in school. Honey, it's okay if you don't understand. Let's pause. Let's take some time. But the first thing I said to him, and I was sharing this with a friend, and she's like, that's deep. I said, you got a lot of toys. My dad was military, so he has a lot of guns. He has a lot of things. And I'm like, listen, when you sit down for school, I'm setting you up to where there's nothing in the background, but please don't pick up a toy. Do not pick up a gun. Do not pick up any of those things because you can get expelled. You can get suspended. All these things can happen. That's called conscious parenting in 2020 when you have a child of color. And I explained this to him. He's like, Mom, really? Are we really having this conversation? I'm like, yes. Well, unfortunately, a child in Colorado Springs had a bright green gun. It was bright colored, whatever the case is, and was suspended from online school for having a gun. So I take this situation and I have a conversation and say, this is why Mommy said this. And he's like, wow, I'm so glad you shared that with me. But that's called being conscious as a parent. We have to parent our kids a little different than maybe somebody else does. So having real conversations, but sharing real stories, I think is really also important. And not just saying, do this and not giving them why. When I was raised, I didn't question anything. A kid sat at the table, you ate, you walked away, you didn't like engage in conversation. A child stays in a child's place. That is not how I'm parenting my kid. And I do think at that time, it was actually good because I didn't know all the politics and I didn't know what they were protecting me from. They say, get home before the lights come on. And now I understand all the reasons why. But with my kids today, we have real conversations and I share stories as to why we have these boundaries, which goes into the ship. So when you think of relationship, I think of like championships. I have a football player. So he's been to several championships and we sing this song, we're going to the ship. We're all excited about going to the championship. So we have to champion our kids. At the end of the day, we are the first person that they look to. We want to champion them. We want to set boundaries that are positive, healthy boundaries. We want them to understand the why. But in being a champion, it's okay to set boundaries, but it's also okay to bring them in to problem solve. So if they break a boundary or they do something, a lot of times we have a conversation. We sit down and say, so, this is a boundary. You crossed it. You did the wrong thing. What do you think the consequence should be? And we actually bring them into those consequences. But then what are you going to do to change your behavior in the future? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't want you to repeat this thing. So we have championship conversations. We're their supporter. And my quote is, failure sometimes leads to success. So I also allow my kids to not be perfect in school. I don't want them, they don't have to be straight A students. Let me tell you, I may be a doctor today, but if you go back on my transcripts, you'll go, how did that happen?
I doubt it.
How did that happen? I was not a straight A student. I don't expect that of my kids. And sometimes the most brilliant people are average students or even below because they're bored or they're not being engaged. They're not being able to be innovative. And what I will say as a parent raising an African-American child, often if you look at stats and if you Google this, research it, do what you will, a lot of times children that are white are more innovative. We're more creative or they are more risk takers. But why is that? Because a lot of times as African-American parents, we put these boundaries and we don't allow them to do certain things because we're trying to protect them, A, from society, B, from other things. So I'm trying to learn how to balance that and allow my kids to be innovative, allow them to be creative, allow them to fail their way into success. And no, you don't have to know your journey. My daughter's in school right now, but she's at a community college. That's wisdom. We're saving money because I already know her degree is going to change 3 times and we're saving money. Go to community college first, figure that thing out and then move forward. So what I would leave you with as I talk about relationships is be real, relate to your kids, empathize, understand, get on their level and be present and set boundaries in many different ways. So even like conversations, my kids know at 9 o'clock, I become unconscious.
Me too.
So my boundary is do not ask me anything after 9 p.m. because I'm liable to say anything. And the next day go, what did I say? I told you could do who? And so that's a boundary in our house, but they also have boundaries. My daughter calls me out. She's like, Mom, you're not present. And I'm like, huh? You're passively listening. What? And I'm like, you're right. And so what I'll do is I will schedule time to have a conversation. I'll be like, I'm in the middle of this, but can we set a date? Can we set a time at 7 p.m. where I'm going to be present with you and we're going to talk through this? Like I'm real with them because I do work from home and I'm leading an organization, which means I'm available all the way around the clock. But I also set boundaries, even with my team and my peers to say, listen, if I have an appointment with my baby girl, I'm not going to answer the phone. We're going to talk and we're going to be present. So those boundaries go both ways, not just as a parent, but even for your children, what do they need? Like every child's different. My child's a talker. My oldest, that 18-year-old can give you some stuff and she just talk. So we set boundaries there. But my son, he's more active, whatever the case is, we have boundaries too. But getting that relationship to understand what they need, because to Devon's point, you're 100% right. Every child is different. Every child needs something different and you've got to get on their level and figure out what they need.
So we were talking about kind of these 3 pillars, this idea of like replenishing ourselves, making sure that we can show up in a more like a less emotional, more objective, more rational, more centered parenthood space more often than not for our kids during times like this. And we're talking about kind of race relations in America, in the world, with everything that's happening and the stuff that's on the news. And then we talk about what Renata was saying, which is just really the replenishment side and then the focusing on relationships and what is your relationship with your children. And this is children of all colors and of all backgrounds, right? Because our goal for all of this is to figure out how, if there's anything that we have done, good or bad, in our parenting as people of color who have children who are we're raising people of color, right? Is there something that you can learn from us, whether you look like us or not, in this space of discussing these really kind of crazy topics that are going on right now in America? And so one of the things that I thought, and we like a third pillar, is really respect. And when I came up with this idea of respect, it really is about respecting the human person. It's about the dignity of each individual, despite the color of their skin. And so teaching our children that from the very beginning. So for example, I have a couple of my children have very strong opinions of different people in our population. I won't go into any more specifics than that, but they do have strong opinions. And so I'm always finding myself challenging them to make sure that they understand that those people, no matter their background, no matter what they look like, any of that stuff, that those specific people are humans and they deserve respect in and of themselves as they're walking about the earth. And so the ways that we show respect to people, I just did a training the other day with a second round of this, actually third round, with law enforcement that were out of California. And we were doing emotional intelligence training right before they were going to be doing some more kind of unconscious bias training. And some of the biggest learnings and the things that I think are really the start of many of the disrespect to human life in our country as it relates to the racial relations issues is this lack of empathy, not empathizing with people that are in front of us, not as Cordelia was talking about, really taking that pause inside of ourselves, kind of scanning ourselves for how we're feeling as we face off in front of this person or these people, whatever that is. How are we feeling inside our skin? And then how then are we receiving what they're feeling? So kind of stepping outside of our shoes, putting ourselves in kind of by them in their shoes, and then looking at the world through their eyes. And when we're able to do that, to empathize with people and to really try to sit in their shoes for a little bit, I feel like a lot of the things that are happening will go away. So that's what I try to talk to the kids about when it sounds like they're saying narrow-minded things to just about different people in the world. I will go to them and say, okay, but they're human too. I need you to realize that they deserve respect like anyone else. It doesn't matter if you agree with lifestyle, with what they said, and any of that stuff. That actually is irrelevant. Separate yourself from the politics of the matter, which I know is easier said than done, and maybe not even easy for people to say in most cases, but I can say it because I can do it. So taking the politics out of the situation and saying, who is this little boy? You have two children in a playground, one white, one black, and you're a parent, you're a white parent, and you have your son's like, well, I don't understand why that chocolate boy or that this has happened. So I'm saying this because these are real life circumstances. And you would say, okay, well, what is wrong? Why would you say that about him? Why are you saying it in that way? Because that person is also a child of God if you're some of a faith. And if you're not, okay, this is still a human being walking on the earth. You have equal value to you. So this idea of respecting the human in front of you, despite anything else, any differences that are there, is kind of the critical foundation, I think, that most parents need to really be focusing on more when they're interacting with their children, because it comes up a lot. They develop these prejudices and all these things very early on, and many of them are spawned by us. And or the environment that they're in, like schools and communities and their grandmothers and their great grandmothers, right? And it comes on, and how can we stop it right in its tracks?
As I listen to you, Heather and Renata, you're reminding me of a story. One day I was washing dishes, right? I have a dishwasher, but I like to wash dishes because it calms me down. Anyway, so
I love that too.
my 10-year-old, she's coming into the room. She's all excited. She had just created something, and she's just blah, 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 blah. And meanwhile, why did I need to calm myself down? I was really, really upset about something that had happened. I was having a really charged exchange with someone about an article, one of our 360 articles, Heather. And I was just like trying to decompress from that. So it was really noisy upstairs, okay? Anyway, and she's just like, Mom, what do you think? And I was like, I turned off the water. I turned around and I said, can you come closer to me? I said, you know what? I would like you to repeat that again because the water was so loud. I didn't even hear your story. Can we begin again? And I just sat down at the table and looked her in her eyes and listened. This is how we teach respect. This is how we teach empathy. And this is how we teach children to relate to other human beings, by that kind of presence with them, by like not just caring. Like I could have just, stood there at the sink with the water off and been like, oh yeah, that's great. Okay. But no, you really have to be there with them, whatever it is. So that's what comes up for me when I think about what you were saying. What do you have to say, Devon?
I just want to piggyback on a few things that everyone has said. Diversity is and many times our strength, but we also have to deal with as is reality, right? So when I talk about children, my children or in my community, ultimately, right? Ultimately, like no matter where you come from, where you're from, we know that ultimately we are all one, right? But before we even get to that, we have to deal with what is as is reality, right? So there's conversations that go on in my household with my two Black sons about, like, my son just got his license, conversations that aren't going on in other households, right? So for me, for us, I understand, and I always come from love with my children and understand the oneness of the humanness. But we also, and before we even get there, we can't skip the step of really addressing as is reality. And for us to do that, we need more than just people who look like us in the conversation. Because right now we're in a game that is rigged, and we need the people who rigged the game to be part of the solution. So for me, when I talk to my children in my community, it's about, look, can we bring people in who we disagree with, who we may not like how they live, we may not like who they vote for, but we need them in the conversation. And can we understand and learn how to disagree without being disagreeable? Right? We can have points, but most of us are trying, and this is how we parent too, and almost how that authoritarian type of parenting is played out in society. That's the institutional part of this whole thing. When you look at why political parties can't agree and get anything done, why you think different groups, it's because this I'm right and you're wrong kind of thinking and listening. And until we change the way we listen to our children, to communities, to people that we don't agree with, nothing's going to move forward in the way it could. Like, can we really show up neutral? But most people listen trying to convince, waiting for the time to convince the other person they're wrong. And that starts in our home. It starts with our children. Like they're saying some really valuable stuff, but many times we're already drawing on 40 years of our knowledge just to drop the jewel on them. But for me, for us to move this thing forward, both in parenting and in the world, is really to get more curious. We walk around and we want to be interested we want to be interesting instead of interested. And for me, we have to open this inquiry around race. Right, we have to open this inquiry around institution, and I think Renata or Heather said this before about slowing down with our children and actually asking the follow-up questions. Well, let's talk about that. Let's make this a dialogue instead of a monologue. So the conversations I'm having, with my children are deep conversations, man. They're about all how they can actually stay alive, right? But I'm not teaching them through fear. Right. Because what happens is because we care so much in the home, it's a lot of fear-based teaching that's going on. And when there's fear-based teaching, it cuts out what Renata was talking about, their ability to be creative. Because if I am in a box of fear, it's hard for me to see possibilities. So we have to be responsible, right? Responsible and respect the relationship and what's going on in the world, but still have this open container of love and possibility for our children, so they're not so cornered in and feeling so much pressure. There's enough pressure out there that when they come in my house, it should feel like a loving committed environment where they can actually grow their creativity. So look, to much is given, much is expected, man. And for me, like, this is it, right? Like, it starts in our home, and like, with all the stuff that's happened in my life and all the great things, if I don't spend the time and the attention to nurture my children and work it from my family to my community to the world, then none of the other stuff really matters. So for me, it's slowing down in order to speed up. And I like to use the analogy of like a 10-speed bike, when you're in the 1-1 gear, and many of us feel as parents of Black and brown children that, like, we're in 1-1 gear, we're working, we have 2 jobs, we come home, we have our own business. And sometimes we're in that 1-1 gear where we're feeling like our legs are going fast, but we're not going far. And we have to take a step back. We have to take a step back to slow down, to get more intentional, to get more aware, so we can up level those strokes to like a 4-6 gear, where our legs are going slower, but we're getting more momentum. So for me, how do I slow that down? Is by really getting into my children's world and being more curious, getting into people that I may disagree with world and getting curious and asking questions. And from that, we can really move this thing forward.
I like one of the things I heard like loud and clear was, well, they were just asking the questions and pausing, not for you to respond, or not even with an expected response back from them, but just always kind of continuing to be curious and ask the questions, because then you model that curiosity to them. The other thing that you said, Devon, that just like hit me, just boom, was this idea of the home, and that it's no matter who's watching or listening right now and who'll be listening or watching later, this interaction, you choose your home. You choose what goes on in your home, what you tell your children in your home. It does not matter what your parents told you. You choose how much what your parents told you or showed you impacts how you now parent your current children in your home that you choose, that you create. That's powerful, isn't it?
It's really powerful. And there's 2 choices. You can have a home that's based on default, right? It's just a default culture in your home, meaning, I just react to things and I'll just draw on what my parents did. Or you can create an intentional home. You can create a family structure that's intentional, that we really slow it down and get intentional in the love, in the questioning, in what we're reading, in what we're doing together, in how we're respecting each other, and how we're giving each other the space we need. So I think that that's very important, because sometimes we just get an autopilot and we're on default mode, and all that leaves us is past, and we're making our future our past instead of creating a new future in the present.
Yeah, no, that's deep, Devon. I like that. When I think about what you're saying, because you said a whole lot of great stuff about like how we're, intentional and having conversations and being like proactive as a parent, like giving them the tools, right, in order to communicate effectively and share and talk about it's, because it's about how you respond. Because the reality is, like, that's part of relationship, right? Reality. The reality is we are in a world where we're living in a certain society and things are happening. And those are just flat out realities. And we can't ignore those as parents, but we can give our kids positive, I'd say, weapons, right? Positive ways to respond to things. Like, we're always constantly telling my son, honey, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's how you communicate what's happening. And I can share a story, even with my child, my oldest, years ago at a school that she went to that didn't have a lot of brown people at, and she was in a situation where she was in music, and this parent told her, I need you to get, and like waved his hand, like, get. And I'm like, what happened? When I go back to being a champion, I am a champion of my child, and I'm going to make sure I hear her out. And I'm like, can you explain to me like what happened? And so she's like, well, Mom, I was just sitting there and he told me to get. And I was like, what do you mean, like, get? And he kind of waved his hand at me like I was an animal. And I'm like, oh, no. This does not work. And I'm going to be a champion, but I'm going to show her effective communication. And I wrote a letter to the principal, and I was like, listen, this is what happened. I want to address this. I need to meet with you. The day is trickling through, and they normally are very responsive. And she responded, oh, well, that parent's a police officer and he would never respond that way. So it's automatic like defensiveness. And I'm like, that's great to understand how he wouldn't respond. Just so you know, I will be contacting our local community news to share this story should you not respond. And so I became a real champion of my child. Went to the school. Of course, she greets me quickly, brings me in. My daughter shares her story, which is a story that a child at that time, she's 6 or 7, would not have made up. And so it's the same story. And so she's like, well, what would you like me to do? I said, well, you need to talk to that parent, because what we're not going to do is treat my child like she's an animal. And I don't care what your status is. You can be a doctor. You can be a lawyer. You can be a police officer. You can be a judge. I do not care who you are, but you're going to show my child respect. And so she ended up getting me in contact with that individual. And we had a conversation. And he shared with me, and we unpacked it. He said, well, often I tell my kids, hey, get out my way. I said, well, that's how you parent your child. This is not your child. This is my child. And she perceived it to be. And we had a really good interaction. We communicated well. He actually apologized. My daughter ended up working with her daughter many years later at a restaurant. And we ended up bridging this gap. But I share that story to say, we are in a real world and real reality, but we do need to, Heather, show respect. We have to go in willing to hear and not only respond. And that's what Devon was saying is people want to talk, listen, but you're like ready to get in. You're about to jump in with my response. I got something to say. But instead, sometimes you just have to have the conversation, and it is necessary. I was not willing to not have that conversation because I also needed to go back to my daughter and say, he was wrong. He apologized. And I appreciate you sharing that with me, because you should get respect as well. As a child, you should be respected. And then this is how you have a conversation without going up there and responding in a negative way, but in a professional way and meeting people where they are.
And Renata, that's such a beautiful story. And to me, that's how you break the cycle. That's how your audio matches your video, right? Now your daughter sees a way out, a way to address things that we never would have known, right? That children never would have known. So I acknowledge you. To me, that's a perfect example of showing by, how you're living. And we don't always get it right, but it's a beautiful thing when we're able to give them kind of a different road that isn't just reactionary, that just isn't fear-based, right? So I just acknowledge you. I love that story. That's super powerful.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things too is thinking about thinking about what we do as parents and the things that we can teach them. I was just talking to the person who was doing my hair recently about this, and it's this idea of forgiveness. So here's the thing. People do bad things every day. We all are none of us are perfect. Okay. We make bad choices, and in our own way, we pay the price. But when our children are meeting people where they either know they did something wrong, they see them on the news, and they have this sense that something wasn't right and that someone did something wrong. I feel like it's up to us to show them compassion, show them what compassion and forgiveness looks like in that moment. Because so an example would be, if they're seeing something in the news related to a police officer, maybe they did something right, and we're judging it as that was just they should not have done that. Yes, that is right. They should not have done that. But they do get to choose a different tomorrow. They can choose how they show up differently tomorrow. And you, as a human, as a child or whatever, you should be the person that says, it's okay. You messed up a little bit yesterday, didn't you? But I'm with you today. And so being the kind of friend that allows your friends or those around you not to have to be perfect, for them to make mistakes, and for you to be the one that forgives for that. Because a part of what I think is happening, and this is my personal filter, and this is my lens, and that's what we all walk around with, is I think that people aren't forgiving other people. So there's this idea of folks not respecting other humans that I'm seeing out there in the world. And there's this idea of people not forgiving other humans for things they have done. Now, I'm not talking about someone shoot you in the back, but I've seen people who have either their child has been shot and killed, someone has been hurt, and the parent has gone to forgive the person. And so what's happening is you don't have to say the word, just through your behaviors that we're teaching those around us who are watching all the time, especially our children. They're watching us all the time. And how we respond to kind of a stimuli that's right in front of us, something that's happening right in front of us, makes all the difference in how our parenting's the impact our parenting has. What do you guys think about that?
I was going to say, this is super powerful. And this makes me think of my 7th child. So my 20-year-old has a friend that, she's been hanging around lately. And she had an incident. She had a really bad car accident, actually. And the police officer assumed that she had been drinking, right? And so she told me like all the ins and outs of the story. And at first, I have to be honest, I was like, what? I can't believe that. And then I was like, but of course, that's just my anger talking. So let's just break that down. And she was like, actually, my attorney found out that particular officer is in the DUI division, and it's his job to ask those series of questions, right? So it wasn't, so I helped her to, to work through that initial, I had it too. I was like, look, see, I don't even know how to deal with it when I hear stuff like that, because it drives me nuts. You're a young Black woman, and, you got hit by a semi and you're being asked if you're drunk, and I couldn't control that. But then I pulled it back and I said, okay, well, let's look at it from this perspective. Okay, that's his job, and he's trying to find the facts. And so, now it's about separating the facts of the story so that we support you and build the best case, and just filter out the emotions. And I said, and just to help you with that, let's have let's record our emotions somewhere separate. So, yeah.
Oh. I appreciate that. And Heather, I gave it some thought, because what you said, it made me take a step back and look at what is actually we're talking about. And to me, there's 2 different realms here, right? In many ways, like it's a spiritual and a practical realm, right? And so, for instance, in parenting, right? My son once said, Dad, if I don't want to play this sport, will you still love me or something? And I said, and I looked at him and I said, sit down. I said, listen, I need you to know this. No, there is nothing you can do. There is nothing, not one thing. I don't care what it is. Nothing you could do on this planet that I will ever stop loving you. I may not like what you do. I may be upset with what you do, but there is nothing, and I mean nothing, that you could do that I would ever stop loving you. And he never asked me that again, because there's a safety that he feels that he can really make choices and be wrong and figure it out. Because my best learning experiences, I'm like Dr. Robinson. Like, if you look at my transcript, I don't even mean the school transcript. I just mean life transcript. They're like, how this guy doing what he's doing now? If there's anyone who shouldn't be where he is, it's probably me. So how am I gonna let them know that how you fall short, how you make mistakes, how you are the biggest learning opportunities in your life? Now, in regards to what's going on in the world, I think that the forgiveness part is interesting, right? Because the as is reality, the practical is, it's just like we teach children. When we do things, there's consequences. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big advocate for my community. I'm a big advocate for change in this institutional racism. I think that when people do things, there's going to be consequences. That's the rules of life we're living by. That doesn't mean on the spiritual level I can't forgive, because what I've learned is forgiveness isn't even about the other person. Forgiveness is to free me up. It allows me to stop walking around heavy and with resentment and with anger. So when I'm forgiving even someone or something I may not like or I don't agree with, I'm freeing myself up. So I think that it's not an either or proposition. We can be for justice and change and really upset and honoring our emotions of being angry that our children are being killed out here, or that, there's a game out here that's rigged. And at the same time, coming from the oneness aspect of there is a place where there is forgiveness, because the forgiveness is going to free me up and allow me more space to love and really make a difference. Because if I'm just lined up and dealing with anger and emotions, it's going to supersede my ability to really make a big impact.
Yeah.
Yes, and I was going a little deeper with that concept. So I agree with you. The idea of the oneness and kind of the idea of separating in my mind, I keep saying like separating the politics from the person, like separating what they stand for, what they did from the person, like that idea. But I think the forgiveness for me, I think also has a lot to do with understanding the other person's filter and where they're coming from. So basically like how they walk in their shoes in the world, and then how they experience a certain situation different than what I experience that situation. And so if I learn that from an early age, that someone's coming at me one direction, one way, because they're stepping in different set of shoes with a different set of filters, with a parents, grandparents, community, all these things, the messages were different than my messages. And I truly understand, like I'm seeking fully to understand that. Then when they do the thing they do, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I'm going to say or agree it's right, but now I'm understanding them more. So then if we ever get to the point where we have to come to the table to have a conversation, well, I still don't agree with what you did, but you have to pay the price for what you did. Yeah. I can sit there with a truer understanding of the why. And as Renata said earlier, it's so much of what's missing is the understanding of why. Why are we acting this way? Why are we talking this way? Why do we respond to one another this way? And that, to me, I think would be a critical thing for our children to understand, to be able to dig deeper and care enough to find out the why.
Yeah.
Why?
But that's more of a compassion, a human compassion thing than a forgiveness thing. Go ahead, Devon.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, 2 examples. I love, what you're saying. I did a weekly thing for 5 weeks called Co-Creating the Bridge. And it was, 600 people showed up from all over about racism and institutional and bias. And at one point, the question I continue to ask is, what is the question that you want to ask that up until this point you haven't felt safe enough to ask? What is the comment you want to make, but you're scared to make the comment because you'll be judged? And I think that only until we create a space in which people feel comfortable, then there's breakthroughs happen. So a white man raises his hand after some of the shares and says, listen, and listen to these stories, I have unconscious and conscious, I'm racist. And he said, and I've been unaware of the pain that I'm hearing on these calls today. And then he started breaking down crying. He said, I'm not okay with that. And he showed up every other week and contributed just like everyone else came and contributed, because he felt like there was a space in there not to be judged, that like we got to create the space to move this thing forward. And we can't create the space with people who just think and act like us. We need people who actually contributed to the game being rigged to help create a new game. And I think that is a little like what you're saying, Heather, in that we're opening our hearts up in many ways. We're not justifying things.
Nope.
And we're calling things what they are.
Yep.
But for us to move forward, we have to create that space.
Mm-hmm.
I so agree, because I have a lot of training courses around unconscious and conscious bias. And I will tell you, often when I walk into a classroom, it's already shut down. And why it's shut down is because of previous conversations and previous approaches to this tough conversation. And so I like to reset it and say, listen, what I want us to do is offer grace and understanding that we all have a different journey. Everyone has a different background. Everyone has different cultures. We've all grown. We've all lived a different way. And to walk in, and I will just say this, with the expectation that everyone thinks the same way as we are is ignorant in the first place. Right? To walk in and expect people to jump on this journey and understand what we've been through and be able to just jump into our shoes is actually also ignorant. We have to pause and really share, reflect, and let people understand the journey in a place. It's kind of like what Devon said. I love how he does this with his son. He says, I love you and there's nothing you can do. I'm always going to love you. Creating that safe space to say, I care enough to really hear the truth of where you are to help you come along this journey to understand the impacts of what's happened today. And I also like to remove people from the situation. Our society has taught us a lot. Our systems have taught us a lot because it's the way things are. But if you remove the person and say, what were you taught? And how did you learn? And now it's time to unlearn some of those things, because if we choose to unlearn, it's a conscious choice. And people like choices. Our children like choices. Everyone likes choices. But when you come in demanding and expecting and saying, this is what you're going to have to do, and this is what is going to happen, you've already lost before starting because people are defensive. So how go and not be defensive, but offer grace and offer real room for growth in that conversation. And I'm very passionate about that, so I'm gonna let that go. But I'm just saying that's
no, I agree, and that's where I was getting to. Maybe the word grace is probably a better use of the word, but that's exactly what I was getting to. It's this idea, the grace of imperfection, and you have to offer it to those that you expect. If you're expecting to sit around a diverse table of people and offend a minimal amount of them, and uplift and I guess enlighten a maximum amount of them, you have to offer grace first. So that was really the biggest thing. It looks like Cordelia dropped up. She'll probably be popping back on. So I'm thinking now we're approaching that mark. So I want to make sure that we all can. Hello there, dear. We're just going to wrap up with kind of like this, kind of a final statement or something that you think is really critical to consider right now as we're talking about conscious parenting during this time with the race relations in America and the world. What's kind of a pearl of wisdom you'd like those who are tuning in now and will later to take with them? Devon?
A couple things. One is, it's hard to wrap our mind around this concept, but it will open up so much when you realize that people are actually doing the best they can with the current thinking they have. And if you had that same thinking, when you look at no matter who you're judging and say, if I had that same thinking, I would do the same thing. And the other thing is around parenting, if we come from a place of course, we want to protect our children, but less fear and more love, it'll allow for our children to kind of step into a creative space, a leadership space that we have never seen before. For too many years, we've been playing defense, and understandably, but at some point we have to now get on offense and come from a place of really love and creativity. And I'm just grateful for spaces like this. I want to acknowledge Heather and Dr. Renata and Cordelia. I think that having more conversations around this is very important. It doesn't start and end here. And stay in inquiry. Keep asking questions. The greatest things get achieved not by people with the answers, but by people asking the best questions. So thanks for having me, and I'm grateful to be here with all you wonderful women.
Thanks, Devon. Cordelia?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I always encourage my children to be a beacon of light and create the joy wherever they are. And for us as parents to remember that judgment is really a reflection of ourselves. So rather than to project, right, always come from a place of love. So
thank you. Renata?
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything. It's been great just hearing all of the great tips that everyone has given on this call and this time together. I think when I think of grace and forgiveness and things we talked about, be willing to give yourself grace and forgiveness. We are in a time where we're all learning, and there's a lot of things we're all ignorant about. Let's just be honest. There's nobody on this call that's an expert in every area, but also sharing that with your kids and being honest and sharing stories and relating to them, and then together journeying with better solutions. Like, how do you handle this? So I think it's really just about really being present. And I love when Devon was talking about that. I think we have to be present in so many ways with our children and creating that space and that time and that energy to talk about what's happening and just being gracious with one another.
I think I'd like to round it out by just saying that while we want to create those safe spaces, we cannot discount the importance of the safe spaces that we create for our children in our homes. We also should hold them accountable for their words and their actions and make them reflect on maybe how they could do things differently. That's where the learning comes in. So that would be critical. And again, the other thing is teaching them that each person is a human walking on the earth, deserving of respect in and out of themselves, irrespective of their choices, irrespective of where they came from. And so that's the thing that I'd hope to leave you with. So anybody who joined, don't forget to share this. If there are a lot of people that are different coming in from Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn, but share it far and wide in your network. And you may see more of the four of us in another forum later on. So keep your eyes peeled out. But thank you everybody for joining. It's been wonderful.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.